Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are opening the sources on a subject that, well, it touches pretty much every family, every community. It's, frankly, deeply disturbing. We're talking about this sudden, really sharp international epidemic of adolescent mental illness that just seemed to explode in the early 2010s. Our mission today is to get past the headlines, and really try to uncover the mechanism. What are the core causes behind this tidal wave of suffering?
Yeah, and when you look at the historical data, it's not a slow burn. It's not a gradual decline. It's like a sudden break, a real rupture in how kids grow up. Our sources are calling this whole shift the great rewiring of childhood. And Gen Z, the kids born after about 1995, they're basically the first human generation ever to be, well, unwitting participants in this huge, uncontrolled experiment on young minds.
That framing that we sort of sent Gen Z to grow up on Mars, that's really powerful. It captures just how radical and frankly isolating their experience was. They hit puberty, that really sensitive developmental window, with this portal on their pockets, a smartphone, giving them instant access to everything everywhere all at once. It completely unhooked their development from, the physical, local, real-time reality that humans grew up in for, well, millennia.
And we really need to be clear about what kind of crisis we're talking about. This isn't just, oh, teenagers are moody. That's not it at all. We're tracking a massive, very specific surge in what the specialists call internalizing disorders. So think anxiety, deep fear, profound sadness, this debilitating hopelessness, self-harm, and critically, the suicide rates. It's this turn inward, constant rumination, pulling away socially. It suggests a generation whose basic psychological defense systems are just stuck on high alert all the time.
Okay, so let's dig into that timeline then. Because if we're looking for a global cause, we need to be really precise about the timing. When did things really go off the rails, according to the hard data?
The data is pretty unmistakable. If you look at, say, the U.S. government surveys that track major depressive episodes in adolescence, the graph isn't a gentle slope. It's a sharp turn, like a hockey stick almost. And that happens right around the early 2010s, maybe 2011, 2012 is when it really kicks into high gear. We see self-reports of feeling sad, empty, hopeless. They just shoot up.
And you emphasized internalizing disorders. That seems key. Because if the world just got tougher, maybe we'd expect more acting out, like aggression, vandalism, that kind of thing, externalizing stuff.
Exactly. But those trends often show different patterns. Sometimes they even decline. This epidemic is really defined by that inner turmoil, isolation, rumination, anxiety. It's a very specific signature.
And there's a particularly tragic data point involving younger girls, right? Ages 10 to 14.
Yes, that's maybe the most critical clue and the most heartbreaking. This age group, young adolescent girls, they saw the earliest and the steepest increases. For girls aged 10 to 14, the suicide rate started creeping up around 2008, but then it just surged after 2012. Between 2010 and 2021, the increase for that specific group was 167%. That's just staggering. Their vulnerability right at that moment of the great rewiring tells us a lot.
Wow. 167%.
Yeah.
And what really drives it home is that this isn't just an American story, is it? You mentioned it's international.
Absolutely. This isn't something you can blame on, say, U.S. school policies or our healthcare system alone. We see this exact same pattern. The timing, the gender difference, the focus on internalizing issues mirrored almost perfectly across the Anglosphere. So the UK, Canada, Australia, Ireland. And then you see similar surges, maybe slightly delayed, in Nordic countries too. Finland, Sweden, Norway. That strongly suggests there has to be some common global exposure driving this. It's not local.
Right. And that international angle helps us rule out some of the usual suspects, the alternative explanations people often bring up, like the economy, the 2008 crash.
Yeah, that's the first place many people jump. The financial crisis happened, hardship increased, so depression must follow, right? Makes intuitive sense.
But the timing doesn't actually line up, does it? Didn't depression keep rising even as the economy recovered?
Precisely. If the 2008-2009 crisis was the main driver, adolescent depression should have peaked around 2010 when unemployment was highest. But instead, it just kept climbing all through the 2010s, even as adult unemployment fell steadily, hitting record lows later in the decade. The economic recovery didn't fix this. In fact, the trends moved in opposite directions, so it really wasn't the economy, directly anyway.
Okay, so what about other big anxieties, things like climate change or political polarization? People talk about those causing despair in young people now.
Well, we have a lot of history to look back on when it comes to collective threats. Think about the Great Depression or World War II. Historically, when whole nations face big external dangers, people tend to rally. They find purpose, community cohesion strengthens, and surprisingly, suicide rates often drop. Depression and suicide tend to rise when people feel isolated, alone, purposeless, not when they feel united against a common enemy. And the nature of this current crisis, so internal, so isolating, it just doesn't fit the pattern of responding to a shared external threat.
So if it's not the economy and it's not these big collective threats, we have to zoom back in on that specific window, roughly 2009 to 2012. What was the technological perfect storm happening right then?
It was this rapid-fire sequence. First, the groundwork was laid by high-speed broadband becoming common and affordable in the late 2000s. Constant connectivity became possible. Then came the hardware. The iPhone launched in 2007, sure, but the real kicker, especially for these internalizing issues we're seeing, was probably the iPhone 4 that came out in June 2010, and the key feature, the first really good front-facing camera.
Ah, the selfie camera. That little change from pointing the camera out at the world to pointing it constantly back at yourself, that feels huge for adolescents.
It fundamentally altered things because that camera powered the next wave, the explosion of image-centric platforms. Facebook bought Instagram in 2012, turbocharging its growth. Suddenly, you have this environment where teens, especially girls, are constantly curating and being judged on images of themselves, often, highly unrealistic images.
And it wasn't just the images, it's the mechanics of the platforms themselves, right? The like and share buttons.
Yes, that was the behavioral engineering masterstroke. Those became standard around 2009, 2010. Before that, social media was more like, here's what I had for lunch. After the like button, it became a performance. It turned into this hyper-viral popularity contest, a quantified meritocracy based on likes and shares. And as some former tech execs have admitted, that was intentional. They were building, quote, a social validation feedback loop, deliberately exploiting that basic human vulnerability, our need for approval and belonging. That whole convergence-fast internet, smartphones with front cameras, image platforms, and addictive feedback loops created the perfect conditions for this mental health crisis to ignite.
Okay, so the sources argue this crisis comes from two big contradictory failures in how we raise kids, particularly in Western Anglosphere cultures. This seems to be the core claim.
Yeah, it's like we imposed this cultural double-bind on them. In the real physical world, we swung towards extreme overprotection, call it safetyism. But at the exact same time, in the virtual world, we did the opposite. We allowed almost total underprotection. We basically gave them the keys to the entire digital world with almost no supervision or guardrails.
Let's break that down. Failure one, overprotection in the real world, safetyism. This involves understanding a concept called anti-fragility, right?
Exactly. Anti-fragility isn't just resilience, which is bouncing back. Anti-fragile things actually get stronger from shocks and stressors within limits. Think of your immune system. It needs exposure to germs to learn and get stronger. Or muscles need stress from exercise. Children's competence and emotional regulation are similar. They need to experience small failures, resolve minor conflicts, navigate manageable risks, like a psychological inoculation, to build the strength needed for bigger challenges later. If you try to raise them in a perfectly safe, sanitized bubble, free from all frustration, you're basically ensuring they'll be fragile when they inevitably encounter the real world's difficulties.
And the way kids historically got those necessary inoculations was through free play, unsupervised, kid-directed play, which has been declining for decades.
Steeply declining. The data shows it started dropping in the 1980s and really accelerated through the 90s and 2000s. And it was driven overwhelmingly by rising adult fears, mostly fear of abduction or harm from strangers, even though the actual statistical risk of those things was plummeting. Parental perception of danger soared while actual danger decreased. This created this huge gap between the traditional play-based childhood and the new reality.
Can we spell out that contrast? Play-based versus phone-based.
Sure. The traditional play-based childhood was embodied. You used your whole body, felt gravity, got scraped knees. It was synchronous, happening in real time, face-to-face. It was local, usually with kids in your neighborhood. And the cost of entry and exit was high. You couldn't just swipe away a conflict. You had to work it out with the people right there. It involved physical community.
And the phone-based childhood.
It's the mirror opposite. It's disembodied, often sitting still, just eyes and fingers moving. It's largely asynchronous texts, posts, comments, all with delays. It's often one-to-many broadcasting, not intimate back and forth. And the cost of entry and exit is near zero. You can block someone, mute a conversation, leave a group instantly. No need to resolve anything difficult. It's virtual, often anonymous. This massive shift fundamentally changes a child's default psychological state.
You mean the shift between what these sources call discover mode and defend mode?
Precisely. We have these two basic operating systems. Discover mode is the default for healthy development. It's curious, open, playful, sociable. It drives learning and exploration. Defend mode kicks in when we perceive a threat. It makes us anxious, vigilant, risk-averse, focused on safety. By constantly shielding kids from even minor risks and challenges, overprotection keeps them stuck in defend mode much more often. New things, new people start to feel vaguely threatening rather than like opportunities for discovery.
That connects to what play researchers say about risky play, doesn't it? Kids actively seek out things like climbing high, swinging fast, roughhousing.
They do. It seems counterintuitive to overprotective parents, but that kind of play has powerful antiphobic effects. It teaches kids how to manage fear, assess risk, understand their physical limits. The goal isn't eliminating risk, it's encouraging manageable risks. As one source puts it, the aim should be bruises, not scars. Those small hurts teach valuable lessons.
And culturally, this overprotection became safetyism. The definition of safety just kept expanding.
Radically expanding. It went from physical safety, don't break a bone, don't get kidnapped, to encompassing emotional safety. This new idea emerged, especially on campuses and then more broadly, that emotional discomfort itself is dangerous. The belief became, I should not have to feel negative emotions because of what someone else said or did. This elevation of emotional comfort above all else, treating disagreement or offense as equivalent to harm, became this unquestionable value. And it directly undermines the development of resilience, the ability to handle distress.
Okay, so while we were wrapping kids in bubble wrap in the real world, we simultaneously committed the second failure, massive underprotection in the virtual world. The irony is just stark.
It's an incredible blind spot. We obsessed about the tiny risk of a stranger down the street, but handed our kids devices connecting them to billions of strangers and complex adult content online, often with zero preparation. The foundation for this mess was laid way back in 1998 with COPPA, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. It set the age of internet adulthood at 13. 13.
Which is developmentally arbitrary, and anyway, nobody really enforces it, right? It's just checking a box.
Exactly. Compliance is minimal. The sources cite figures like 40% of American kids aged 8 to 12 are already on platforms like Instagram, which officially requires users to be 13. They just lie about their birthday or a parent clicks, okay.
So unlike the real world, where we have gradual steps, learning to drive at 16, voting at 18, drinking at 21 online, it's 0 to 60.
It's worse than that. It's like giving a 10-year-old the keys to a Formula One car and access to the entire internet, which is designed for adult attention spans, adult emotional regulation, and often involves adult dangers like manipulation, scams, and predation. There are simply no meaningful age-appropriate guardrails online. We plunge them into this environment that's completely mismatched with their developmental needs.
So the phone-based life wasn't just passing time. It was actively shaping brains during a critical period, like wearing grooves into the developing mind. Let's talk about the 4 main grooves or harms identified in the sources.
Right. The first, and maybe the most straightforward, is profound social deprivation. The common assumption was, oh, kids are just socializing online now. But the data tells a different story. They lost real-world interaction time, and the online time didn't make up for it in terms of quality.
We see that sharp drop in time spent physically hanging out with friends, starting around 2010, accelerating after 2012, well before COVID. But why isn't texting or Snapchatting a good enough substitute? If they're constantly connected, why the decline in social skills?
Because the quality is fundamentally different. Real-world, face-to-face interaction is synchronous and embodied. It's the lab where you learn crucial skills. You have to read body language, tone of voice, facial expressions. You have to manage conflict in real time, negotiate, take turns, compromise. You learn empathy by seeing the immediate impact of your words on someone else. Online interaction strips most of that away. It's asynchronous, often disembodied, lacks nonverbal cues. Conflict is easier to avoid than resolve, just block, mute, or ghost. You don't get the practice needed to develop social competence. And the correlations are clear. Teens who spend more time on social media tend to be more depressed. Teens involved in face-to-face activities, sports teams, clubs, religious groups generally have better mental health.
Okay, harm number 2, sleep deprivation. This connection seems incredibly strong in the research.
It's one of the clearest causal links. The sharp decline in how much sleep adolescents get and the quality of that sleep lines up perfectly with the rise of smartphone use, especially having phones in the bedroom at night. There are direct biological mechanisms. The blue light emitted by screens suppresses melatonin production, making it harder to fall asleep. And then there's the psychological aspect, the FOMO, the fear of missing out, the constant alerts, the anticipation of the next notification keeps the brain in a state of hyperarousal. You can't fully wind down.
And we have experiments showing the direct impact of removing phones at night.
Oh, absolutely. Studies where they simply restrict phone use after, say, 9 p.m. show immediate benefits. Kids sleep longer, report feeling better, and show measurable improvements in attention, focus, and even reaction times the next day. Sleep deprivation isn't trivial. It's a major biological stressor. It directly fuels anxiety and depression, makes you irritable, impairs judgment, harms learning and memory. It's like pouring fuel on the fire of adolescent mental illness.
That lack of sleep and the constant checking feeds right into the third harm, attention fragmentation. How can deep thinking or learning happen if your focus is constantly being broken?
It really can't. The data is sobering. Nearly half of teens report being online almost constantly. That can mean up to 16 hours a day, often juggling multiple screens, phone, laptop, TV. This creates a state of continuous partial attention. Your brain never gets to settle into deep focus, what some traditions call samadhi or flow. That state is essential for consolidating memories, engaging in complex thought, developing expertise. Instead, the brain is trained for constant context switching, scanning for the next stimulus. It becomes restless, easily distracted.
And we see a cognitive cost reflected in academic performance.
We do. Disturbingly, that rise in teen depression around 2012 coincided with a reversal of previously rising national educational test scores, like the NAEP scores in the U.S. The decline was often steepest among lower performing or lower income students, perhaps because they had fewer buffers or alternative engaging activities. When your attention is constantly fragmented, deep learning becomes incredibly difficult.
Which leads us directly to the fourth foundational harm, the engine driving this fragmentation: addiction. These platforms aren't just time-consuming, they're engineered to be addictive.
They absolutely are, using very sophisticated behaviorist principles. The key mechanism is the variable ratio reinforcement schedule. Think of a slot machine. You pull the lever or refresh your feed, and you might get a reward, a like, a comment, a juicy notification, or you might get nothing. Because the reward is unpredictable. Sometimes it comes fast. Sometimes after many tries, you just keep pulling the lever, keep scrolling. It creates this compulsive loop, often almost unconscious.
And the reward, the dopamine hit, it's not actually about pleasure or satisfaction, is it? It's more about wanting.
Precisely. Dopamine is the chemical of motivation, anticipation, seeking. It makes you want to scroll, want to check, want to see what's next. It doesn't deliver lasting satisfaction. If it did, you'd stop. It drives the seeking behavior itself. Sean Parker, Facebook's first president, was blunt about it. The goal was to exploit a vulnerability in human psychology. And when users try to stop, when they put the phone down, they experience classic withdrawal symptoms: increased anxiety, irritability, trouble sleeping, a general feeling of unease or dysphoria. We essentially allowed an entire generation's brain chemistry to be hijacked during its most sensitive developmental period.
So while these four harms affect everyone, the sources show that the Great Rewiring pushed boys and girls down different paths, leading to different kinds of distress.
Yeah.
Let's start with girls who saw that really dramatic spike in internalizing problems. Why was social media in particular so damaging for them?
It taps into some fundamental, though obviously generalized, psychological drivers. Research suggests girls are often more motivated by what psychologists call communion, the drive for connection, belonging, harmonious relationships, caring for others. Social media platforms brilliantly exploit this. They promise infinite connection, infinite belonging. But what they often deliver is infinite comparison and judgment wrapped in the guise of connection.
And for girls, that comparison seems intensely focused on appearance, beauty, and social status derived from that.
Overwhelmingly, the platforms create this relentless feed of curated, often digitally altered images, setting impossible standards for beauty and popularity. A girl's perceived worth can feel directly tied to how she looks in photos and how many likes those photos get. This fuels something called socially prescribed perfectionism, this intense pressure to meet the perceived high expectations of others. And the data shows this specific type of perfectionism shot up among girls in the early 2010s, and it's very strongly correlated with anxiety and depression. The judgment is silent, constant, and quantified.
There's also this disturbing idea of sociogenic illness, where negative feelings or even symptoms can spread through social networks, particularly female ones.
Yes, because female social dynamics often involve more emotional sharing and expressiveness, mood states can be more contagious. Research cited in the sources found, for instance, that depression could spread from one girl to her friends, significantly increasing their risk. This social context likely contributes to some rapid rises we've seen in certain self-diagnosed conditions, like dissociative identity disorder becoming much more common among teens online, or the really striking reversal in the gender ratio for gender dysphoria referrals. Historically, it was mostly natal males seeking treatment. Now, it's overwhelmingly adolescent natal females. These patterns suggest that shared identities and narratives, sometimes involving distress, can spread rapidly in these highly connected online environments.
And we also have to address the darker side, the increased exposure for girls to online predation and harassment.
Absolutely. The virtual world is simply more dangerous for girls in specific ways. They face significantly higher rates of unwanted sexual advances, harassment, and potential grooming, often because platforms do far too little to prevent adults from interacting with minors. This constant low-level, or sometimes high-level threat forces girls to be more vigilant, more guarded online. They spend more time in that defend mode we talked about. This baseline hypervigilance directly feeds into anxiety disorders.
Okay, shifting to boys. Their path through the great rewiring looks different. Less of the internalizing surge, perhaps. More of a general disengagement from the real world, a retreat.
Right. If girls are often driven by communion, boys are often, again generalizing, more motivated by agency, the need to feel competent, effective, assertive, to have an impact on the world. The real world, especially the increasingly structured, overprotected version that emerged, was already making it harder for boys to find healthy outlets for agency through physical challenges, unsupervised exploration, building things, taking calculated risks. Then the virtual world arrived, offering much easier, lower-stakes ways to feel competent, primarily through video games.
Yeah.
Achievements, rankings, mastering complex systems, it provides a reliable hit of agency.
So if real-world competence felt harder to achieve or too constrained, the virtual world provided a ready alternative.
Exactly, and we see this in behavioral shifts. Boys' enjoyment of real-world risk-taking, like physical challenges, declined even faster than girls after 2010. They retreated from physical risk. Consequently, some externalizing behaviors like physical aggression have actually decreased. They're opting out of the messy, unpredictable physical world in favor of the controlled, predictable reward loops of the screen.
And we can't ignore the role of easily accessible online pornography here, particularly for male development.
It's a huge factor, according to the sources. The constant availability of free, high-definition hardcore pornography provides an incredibly easy, private way to achieve sexual gratification. This fundamentally disrupts the normal, often awkward and challenging process of developing real-world romantic and sexual relationships. Why bother with the risk of rejection, the complexities of intimacy, when an intense simulation is just a click away? It likely reduces motivation to engage in the real-world dating scene. And the usage data shows huge gender disparities, daily use ratios of 5-to-1 or even 10-to-1 male to female, suggesting it's a distinctly male pattern of substituting virtual for real.
But even with all the online gaming, supposedly connecting with peers, boys are reporting being lonelier. The friendship recession.
That's the deep irony and tragedy. They might be spending hours with friends online, but the quality of connection seems lacking. Young men today report having significantly fewer close, confidant friends than previous generations. The statistic is stark. In the 90s, maybe 3% of American men said they had no close friends. By 2021, that number was 15%, a five-fold increase. This isolation, combined with a potential loss of purpose, or meaning what sociologists call anomie, a sense of normlessness, creates fertile ground for despair and, tragically, increases suicide risk for young men as well, even if the pathways are different from girls. The endpoint, for too many, is a sense of meaninglessness and disconnection.
Okay, this paints a pretty bleak picture. An entire generation rewired, suffering in these distinct ways. It feels overwhelming. But the sources argue this is fundamentally a collective action problem. What does that mean, and how does it offer hope?
Understanding it as a collective action problem is crucial because it means it's solvable if we coordinate. It's a situation where everyone making individually rational choices leads to a terrible outcome for the group. Think about the example one source gives of a student, Alexis Spence. She felt she had to get a smartphone, even if she or her parents had doubts. Why? Because everyone else has one. If I don't, I'll be left out.
Yeah.
Each parent giving in makes it harder for the next parent to hold out. The social cost of opting out becomes too high for any single family. We're all trapped by what we think everyone else is doing.
So the solutions have to be collective. We need coordinated action from schools, maybe government-organized parents, to change the environment for everyone at once. The sources lay out 4 foundational reforms, the whales.
Yes, 4 big achievable changes that could reset the environment. Reform number 1, no smartphones before high school. Basically, delay giving these incredibly powerful devices until after the critical early adolescent brain development window, letting kids get wired by reality first. Reform 2, no social media before 16. This means raising the effective age of internet adulthood from that flimsy 13 to 16, when adolescents have slightly better impulse control and identity formation, and crucially, finding ways to actually enforce this.
Which connects to Reform 3, phone-free schools. This seems vital for creating a space free from the constant digital intrusion, not just for learning, but for actual socializing.
It's essential. And not just phones away during class, but phones inaccessible for the entire school day in lockers, or maybe collected in pouches. When phones are gone, kids actually talk to each other at lunch during breaks. They resolve boredom by interacting, not scrolling. It improves focus in class, reduces cyberbullying that spills over from online, and rebuilds a sense of physical community. Schools that have done this see immediate positive results. It might be the last place we can enforce this kind of focused face-to-face environment.
And the 4th reform gets back to the other side of the problem, the overprotection. Far more unsupervised play and childhood independence, essentially letting kids be kids again with manageable risks.
Exactly. We need to actively push back against safetyism. Schools need to become playful schools. That means mandating way more recess. It's shocking when you compare the average 27 minutes of recess in U.S. elementary schools to the 2 hours of outdoor time often guaranteed to prisoners in maximum security. We're literally depriving children of essential movement and social learning time.
And it's not just the amount of time, but the kind of playground.
Yeah.
Less fixed plastic, more
Yeah.
stuff.
Better playgrounds have loose parts, old tires, planks of wood, ropes, cardboard boxes, natural materials, things kids can manipulate, combine, build with. This fosters creativity, collaboration, problem solving, and yes, involves minor physical risks. Play researchers emphasize that scraped knees aren't a failure of safety, they're a feature. They teach kids about limits and consequences directly. It builds that anti-fragility, bruises, not scars.
But how do parents get over the anxiety that drove the overprotection in the first place? It's a real fear, even if statistically overblown.
It requires a cultural shift, but also concrete steps. One great tool mentioned is the Let Grow project. It's a simple homework assignment. Kids have to go do something new on their own that they, and maybe their parents, felt they weren't ready for, like walking the dog alone, going to a nearby store for milk, navigating public transport. It builds the child's competence and, just as importantly, it acts like exposure therapy for the parent. They see their child succeed and their own anxiety diminishes.
Okay, finally, let's tackle enforcement for those first 2 reforms. No smartphones before high school, no social media before 16. If parents are stuck in the collective action trap and tech companies won't self-regulate effectively, how can we make this happen technologically?
The most viable path seems to be device-based and requires government action. First, we need legislation establishing a clear duty of care for tech companies. They must be legally required to design their platforms with child safety and development in mind, treating minors differently than adults. This means things like default privacy settings for kids, turning off addictive algorithmic amplification for minors, and robust age verification.
And the age verification itself, how could that work technically without creating massive privacy issues?
The most promising approach focuses on the operating system level. Think Apple, iOS, and Google, Android, maybe Microsoft. They already have parental control frameworks. They could be required to implement a robust device-based age check. When a device is set up for minor, access to apps rated, say, 16 plus, like most social media, would be blocked by the OS itself until the child reaches that age. This takes the burden off individual parents having to constantly monitor and fight with kids and platforms. It builds the guardrail into the infrastructure, making the safer choice the default for millions of families at once. It helps break the collective action trap.
This whole deep dive really pushes us away from seeing parenting like being a carpenter, trying to meticulously shape a child into some perfect, predetermined form.
Exactly. We need to shift towards being more like a gardener. The gardener doesn't force the plant into a shape. They focus on creating the right conditions, good soil, water, sunlight, protection from harsh elements, and then trusts the plant's innate potential to grow and thrive in its own way. The great rewiring, the shift to the phone-based childhood, was such a catastrophe because we stopped tending the garden. We let this invasive, artificial, asynchronous virtual environment completely overwhelm the conditions needed for healthy growth.
You know, the situation reminds me of that classic social psychology study, the smoke experiment.
Ah, yes, where smoke starts filling a room.
Right. If someone's alone, they usually report it quickly. About 75% do. But if they're in the room with two other people who are actually actors told to ignore the smoke suddenly, only 10% report it. When reality is ambiguous or when something seems wrong when nobody else is reacting, we look to others. We assume it must be okay.
And that's precisely what happened with the digital saturation of childhood. It was like smoke slowly filling the room. We saw the rising anxiety, the depression, the weird social dynamics, but everyone else seemed to be going along with it, handing their kids phones earlier and earlier. So many of us stayed silent, questioning our own judgment. The most powerful thing we can do now is break that silence.
So if you're listening and you look at this data, the suicide spike, the attention crisis, the loneliness, and you feel in your gut that this phone-based childhood isn't right, the message is, say so, talk to other parents, organize, demand phone-free policies in your schools, support political action that requires tech companies to prioritize child well-being. Acting together is the only way out of the trap. It's how we bring childhood back down to earth.
And maybe here's a final thought to leave you with. We know that early adolescence is this incredibly sensitive period for brain development, for cultural learning, for wiring our social and emotional circuits. So imagine the difference. If we successfully shift the norm so that kids spend those critical years, say 10 to 16, primarily engaged in embodied, synchronous, real-world play and interaction, instead of being wired by the asynchronous, disembodied, comparison-driven dynamics of social media from age 11 or 12, how fundamentally different might their brains be, their ability to focus, to empathize, to navigate conflict, maybe even their capacity for joy? It could be a profound difference for the next generation's future. The choice of which path we set them on is really ours, right now.